All right, we are live, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Lake County. I'm your host, David Rich. I have two very special guests on today, Alexandria and Mark. They are local Lake County
There.
residents. And hello. And we're just going to get a little philosophical today. We're going to talk about social justice and maybe the role of government and as far as like how that applies to social justice and that kind of thing. We'll see where it goes. It's dinner time. I don't want to keep you guys for too long. So maybe I don't know 6:30ish, something like. We'll see how the conversation goes. If it gets hot and heavy, we'll keep going. So,
Cool.
so obviously, with all that's going on now, like the question of what is social justice, how is it enforced, applied, respected, that kind of thing, is something that is on some people's minds. Hopefully, especially with the immigration issue and that kind of thing. Is that socially just? Is it socially unjust? Is that kind of thing? Should you have open borders? Should you not have open borders? Social justice can include things like cops dealing with the general public and stuff like that. Like there's a justice issue there for sure as well. So I don't know, Alexander, you want to kick it off because I know that you, as being a member of the Green Party, you're big into that whole thing. So why don't you kick it off, and then Marco will go next.
Oh gosh, geez, social justice is such a broad prompt, and the role of government in it. I mean, well, first off, you want to break each of those terms down. Social, obviously part of a society, and justice, generally, we typically apply that for making amends to some error, some wrong, or stuff like that. So in the most broadest sense, social justice is typically change more often than not from the bottom, from the masses, sort of on up. So the Magna Carta is, I think, the greatest example of that, of what categorically that tends to look like. But obviously, as you just mentioned, police reform and environmental stuff that could take sort of minute, smaller scale impacts in many, many fields. Racial justice, economic justice, environmental justice, right. All those are part of society, and thus, by definition, would categorize as social justice in a way.
Right. Right, and economic justice is an interesting one too, because that's where you get into like different schools of economic thought or philosophies. Like Marxism is heavy on the whole redistribution of wealth, distributive justice, and a lot of people say that's not just because those people earn the money. You don't get to force it. The thing is with like collective efforts towards social justice is they tend to not care about the individual's efforts, right? There's no such thing as property and that kind of thing. So they can just sort of take it away from you, even though it was in your family for 500 years or whatever, and so people push back on that. So Mark, what about you? Have you ever had to deal with it personally, like a bad situation with a cop or anything?
Yeah, I was sitting here pondering on like when we're talking social justice. I mean, you have examples of what different people might see as mechanisms of justice, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But, kind of pondering on that, I think it feels more like it's individualistic, moralistic justice, because we have different facets that people pull into this rubric of, okay, justice is not the cop pulling me over for rolling a stop sign necessarily. But some people would say the law is the law. Same thing in religious things as well, right? There's things that like, no, the justice must be had because whatever the person sinned. A lot of history of that too. Mm-hmm. So, I think the difficulty is social is a concept that you're projecting out to say, I have an understanding of what it is to swim with all the fish. But I mean, honestly, we're swimming with a dozen fish. There's not many people we interact with, but we're trying to understand like the hordes.
Right.
And I know that like, you look at different like parts of society, whether it's evangelical or political or team oriented or family oriented, things like that. There's a lot of perceived need for justice that aligns to those kind of threads, bloodlines or corporate lines or whatever the hell it is, right? So I don't know. To me, it's almost like it's kind of a self-serving term. Social justice, because I'm saying this is what I think is right for everybody else, and who the fuck am I? I mean, there is that to really deal with. Is who am I to say how you should live? Because I've known enough people, because I've done these podcasts before with a lot of different types of people, and it's always been very, very fascinating, because you're like, you gotta have some fucking respect, because people do things differently, they see the world differently, and you step into those conversations and you're like, wow, I am not in Kansas anymore.
Right.
But it exists, right? It's out there.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So I don't know. That's why I'm just like, That's a tough one because social justice says I'm the leader in some sense because we're all sitting here trying to define it. And I think that's kind of the tension, the rub. Nobody wants it defined for them.
No, that's very interesting, and I think you're right. I think in some to some extent. I mean, some people like define justice for everybody else, and not include. I'm like, well, do you do this that you're expecting everybody else to
Her
do?
name is
No,
Karen.
well, huh?
Her name is Karen.
Her
It's a
name is
personality type. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because there's
that's
certain personality types that demand justice from the voices in their head, basically, right? They're running around projecting out their problems on other people, going, let me see the manager right now because I
Right.
need justice.
Right. Because you gave me a small fry instead of a large
Right.
fry,
Right.
know,
No, honestly,
and
we
I
need a
will right
therapist,
this
girl.
wrong. I mean, that's a good point too. Just like, can justice be petty? Or is it not justice if it is a petty situation? Like I ordered a large
It's
fry,
petty
you
in
gave
so
me.
many situations, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have there's religious examples, there's political or legal examples of petty justice, jaywalking,
Right. I just saw a video of two cops went up to this lady's house and demanded that her sons come out to talk to them because they saw him jaywalking before they got home. And they're like, the lady's like, no, that's stupid. It was jaywalking. Who cares? They're fine. And the cops like screaming at her, I'm going to arrest you for obstruction of justice. So there we go again. And the other cops showed up and they're like, no, just they pulled the cops away eventually because it's jaywalking. Nobody gives a shit. Like, okay, but it's justice, damn it. I'm a cop. Stuff like that. So like it can be very, very applied very pettily, for sure. Alexander, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think the thing that we're basically touch on with what you were saying, Mark, is basically the difference between moral duty and moral virtue. That's really sort of where we're splitting hairs over, and sort of where I think the conversation is going and heading towards, which sort of leads back into what I, at least personally, and admittedly, this is my own personal definition, but we're talking also about role of government. I would say one of the most ideal roles of government should be, and ours arguably isn't doing this very well now, but to have a long-term viewpoint, because individuals are going to have their individual needs and want to get those assessed and resolved as soon as possible. The whole reason why we get together in a group is because we feel we're safer in a group from pre-even civilization, or at least as we would call civilization, so to speak, So that's sort of where this goes into, and that's where I would go with it. I would say that the government should be thinking long term, and we should be thinking about our day-to-day lives and stuff like that. They should be thinking about how do we make the environment livable for people long term, and we should be able to worry about our day-to-days, what we say to our friends and stuff like that. Like speech especially is something that I don't tend to get very excited when a government gets into, even if it's very offensive speech, which I know other far lefties might get mad at me about that, but I get too upset about that personally. And plus it goes both ways and ends up getting used against you. So I don't think that's a good rabbit hole to go down.
The right of free speech is a tough one because it contradicts my moral intuition that it's okay for somebody to go out in public and start screaming profanities at a mother and her child. How is that possibly?
That's not free speech. That's intimidation. Free speech is speaking a message. When you're screaming at somebody and down dressing them, that's not free speech. I think this is part of the problem we have is we're like, oh, everything's free speech. No, it's not. You can do this stupid example of yelling fire in a theater, but it's also Karen at the McDonald's counter is not free speech. It's just abusive is what it is, right?
It is.
So I'm curious, as Alexander was saying, when you were saying that these laws should be good for the individual, I'm kind of curious your thoughts because it occurs to me that really laws were always developed generically and they put people into broad categories because there is no real, and I could be totally off on this, not an individual perspective from a legal sense. It's very much male, female, minor or not a minor, elder or not elder. There's very specific categories that is baked into what the government is. Now we have new gender fluid things that are making their way in there, but the government doesn't treat people as individuals. They've always put them in boxes.
Right.
Well, that's what I'm advocating for, basically.
Yeah. Well, we have a yearning for that, but I guess my curiosity from your point of view is it's never been built that way, at least in my head, is how do we get to a point in your view where the governance system accounts for all individuality, because that becomes very, very complicated because there's so many different things that could exist.
Well, that's sort of the thing, and this gets into my view of life, like on a multi-generational level. But basically, there is no going to be such thing as perfection. So therefore, I consider every single generation their duty to do better than their ancestors, and continue to splice that down and get more specific. Make sure less people are left out every single year. We're never going to get it perfect. It's the same reason, like when I talk about trans healthcare, and some people say, "Oh, 1% of it regret it." I'm like, do you see other surgeries that we allow that have a much higher regret rate? Like, that's just with everything comes inherent risk. So we have to acknowledge that.
Well, I mean, that's just because they tied the moralistic aspect to this thing. And again, if you're going for something that's individualistic in a government's point of view, then they should have no moralistic view, because that's one particular sect. There's so many different ways to slice and dice religion that you can't really say you can speak for all religions. Some religions like to kill people. Some religions.
I was just going to say, like, if you use the example of religion, like, okay, I'm going to treat like this type of religious person as this individual religious person within their respective religion, and according to their religion, they get to like beat their wife and children. Well, so I mean, is the law supposed to be like, okay?
well, let me ask the question, because to me, the real question is, I'm going to say, I could be wrong on this, but I'm going to say that all governance structures originated from religious scriptures of thou shalt not stuff.
Codified rules, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hammurabi's text was the first codified law, and then you like the 10 Commandments or the
that's the first governance structure in any growing town, city.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
When people get together and they create a new town, the first thing that they gather for is communion.
Yeah, like how are we going to treat each other?
It's more of a spiritual thing, right? They come together based on that. So it seems to me that that's kind of like the underlying foundation, which is a problem. We know, because there's a lot of scripture things that are like, they say all sorts of nasty things about groups of people for whatever reason, whatever God wanted to be mad at that day, whatever. I mean, however you want to take it. People could say that, oh, that's just, symbolic. But I mean, the word's the word. You're still going to be like, well, it's there. It's a law. I don't know.
It says it.
I mean, y'all are working on Sunday, so what the hell?
there was the Texas is Congress or whatever is trying to like pass the law that schools have to put up the 10 Commandments, and there's a very devout Christian congressman who is not having it. He's like, this is crazy.
I've seen this video, yes.
You have, where he's like, when's the Sabbath? Sunday. I'm like, and they're in Congress in session. I was like, okay, what's today? Sunday. You look like
an idiot. I mean, but that just shows you how the whole thing is just utter manipulation.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, call it for what it is. It's not a religious viewpoint. It's just it's used to manipulate people.
I'm a very spiritual person in my own right, in my own respect, but I always think of spirituality as something that should be liberating and grant you greater freedom and opportunity to become a gretter version of yourself. And that's like
not if it's a governance structure, right?
Right. Right. You will do what I say. So I'm sorry, Alexandria, did you want to say something?
No, I'm just 100% agreeing with what you're all putting down. Thinking of there's this one show I watch called The Line. It's two atheists that regularly host Christian callers, particularly fundamentalists, and it's just
Matt Dillahunty.
It's kind of disconcerting how often they sound the exact same to one another, and then they aren't able to realize that they're not having a lot of independent thought. It's sort of the existential crisis, and I've had this a lot in a lot of discussions I've had with a lot of more religious folks, which is that on the one hand, if you don't go with complete inerrancy, you're just cherry picking, and that could be broken down and attacked why you're just cherry picking this or the other. But on the other hand, I can't think of a single religious text that if you believe in it inherently, that's going to bring about anything other than atrocities, whether that be
really followed every proposition, every command, and whether Old Testament, New Testament, Quran, I don't care what it is, the Hindu Vedas, you're going to be a bad person.
Mm-hmm. It's very true, right? I mean, we do sugarcoat the thing in Sunday Mass or whatever you want to call it, but there's an under structure to this whole religious or governance system that's, I don't know. I think it's like there's a proportion of the population that would utilize this concept of spirituality, God, and whatever to manipulate the masses. We know this.
Oh yeah.
And then there's certainly a portion of the population that are a little more, I don't know, call it sheep brained, and they'll just kind of follow along. And so those two, you know, I don't know if the remaining portion of the population can herd that craziness.
That's an interesting point. Like, how many people can kind of handle their own individualism, their own free thinking.
A lot of people that can't. That's why they're followers. They
I
need to
agree.
follow something. And that's where it gets weird, because if they get more fanatical in their followings, then it's kind of like a sanity check going, those are the people that are blowing up abortion clinics. You know what I mean? It's just like, you think you gone a little too far. I don't know.
Yeah, no,
pretty obvious.
But to them, that is social justice, because they're saving the lives of unborn children. So like going back to like kind of the
Alexandria's point. There you go. There's a perfectly individualistic view of governance. That person would be right under Alexandria's concept of everybody should be supported individually from the government structure. Because this other guy just said I should blow up that building because I'm to save babies sold or whatever it is, right?
Right. No, yeah. I mean, people, no, it's true. And some of these things are very difficult to like come to terms with. Like, I think for example, the abortion issue, I think it's so difficult because I think both sides have good points, meaning the
men and the women.
Huh?
The men and the women.
Well, no, I mean but that's part of it. Okay, but I was going to say
is that like it's just the irony of three guys talking about it, you know.
We might as well call ourselves
Congress.
and I agree that on that point that all these men are making these rules for women. That's just obnoxious, because they have nothing to lose and they're not risking anything because they're men. They can't have babies. But I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, so justice as there's obviously a lot of different views of what justice is itself. Plato thought that justice was harmony. There's social harmony, and then there's individual harmony. It's like you being the best possible version of yourself is like self-harmony, self-individuation. And then of course you contribute those great things to your community, and then society flourishes. Yay. Okay. So, which I think is actually a very cool version of justice. But some people will say, no, it's merely what the individual is due. If you did something wrong, you are due punishment. That if you do something right, you're due reward, that kind of thing.
Well, it's still the right versus wrong. There's somebody calling, the shots somewhere. And that's again, where the rub is it goes back to I don't know, you've seen our Supreme Court do shit where they're basing things back on lunatics that were
slave owners
back in the 1600s or whatever it was, I mean, it makes no sense, but that's what we do.
I agree. I don't think it makes sense that, James Madison scribbling ink on a piece of parchment, that billions of people in the future have to obey every word of it. Like, why? Why? I mean, the 3/5 clause in Article 2. What? What? Excuse me. But okay, so what's like a criminal, somebody who gets convicted of a crime, what do they do? What is justice to deserve justice? Because there's retributive justice, which says that it's retribution. You did wrong, so you deserve to be punished. That's it. Then there's restorative justice, which is you did something wrong. We're going to take you out of society because you're a risk to others, but we're going to try to get you back to being a full good person like you were beforehand. That you're restoring your moral identity, I guess. What would you say about that?
I don't think we have the latter.
I'm 100% on restorative, fairly unequivocally. It's just when I look at the data, I don't unfortunately have this in front of me right now, but I think Portugal is the most famous example that I can think of to where the results tend to show pretty favorably that this is a more ideal outcome, just long-term and even short-term, to making it more stable society and less of a problem. Obviously, nothing's going to be perfect, as we talked about earlier, but I think it's the best we've got so far.
Mark?
Yeah,
but the death penalty
we call our system restorative, but it's not.
Yeah, we do.
So, again, we have this bumper sticker over America that says this is what we do, but we don't.
Oh yeah, no.
So it's kind of hard to have the discussion where it's like, well, duh, yeah, restorative makes sense. But we don't do that because we're in a capitalistic world, and capitalism drives the prison systems, and profit means keeping these people in. And the legal system is supported by certainly putting more people in jail because it puts more money in the system, and everybody loves more money. We all know that. Everybody's squeezed a little bit, right?
Yep. Yep.
So the whole thing, it's kind of like this, it's a bizarre conversation because we're talking about a fantasy that doesn't exist unless it's a bumper sticker. Because I
It's
mean,
just a
the problem
slogan.
is it's like 3 strikes you're out. What is the percent chance of somebody coming out of prison after a whatever 3 or whatever coming out of prison and getting back up to a normal lifestyle?
Oh
It's
yeah,
got to be like low, like I'm winning the lotto percent.
right.
There's
They
gotta be
wanted
a
to like
very
30
high
million or something.
correlation to they don't do anything but go do criminal things because that's what they know. So,
Right.
you know, we didn't restore shit.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like, like that, I mean, that's a good example, Mark, is that like people, when people get out of prison after they've been there for whatever, 10, 20 years, they don't have any money. They
No,
don't, all their friends are gone.
can't play
Probably
in the
half their
game that we're
family's
all
dead.
playing.
Like,
Yeah.
what are they supposed to do? Well, they know how to rob, whatever. So like,
Prompt was.
yeah,
Whatever got you into
The
jail.
original
Right?
prompt was. I thought we were talking about more so like rehabilitative justice, where it's primarily basically opposite of the death penalty. More often, you want to educate people. You want to give them basically, long story short, not committing violence against people who have already done that, because that just perpetuates the cycle. You need to stop it, and it's going to hurt to do it for a lot of folks, but it's turns out to be better. Most
Yeah,
societies that get rid of the death penalty tend to have lower violent crimes. So.
interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, just death penalty is the prime example of retributive justice. Yeah, I mean, it's 100% retribution. I mean, you're killing them. Like they're already in jail. They're already not a risk to anybody anymore. You're killing somebody for killing somebody. That's kind of dumb.
Well, yeah. I mean, we have to admit that those types of people do exist, and there has to be at some limit somewhere our justice system has to, stop that. I mean, it's just, you have to deal with the fact that it is going on. But I think, not talking about the extremes, but the big center of that population is probably going through prison and coming out worse. Because I don't know that our government really supports rehabilitating any criminal.
Which is
They put a higher fine on them. They just put a higher fine on them. You do it again, it's going to be worse. That's really what it is.
Right.
But if they went into jail because at the end of the day, whatever, a starving person on the street's going to do whatever, and maybe that person's more of a Neanderthal and they beat heads, but those types of people exist. And if we leave everybody in utter so many in utter destitute, we can't sit here be surprised that the system doesn't work because we don't make it work.
Right. No, 100%.
The TV cameras go the other direction, but you drive through all these small towns and take a look around, and no, it ain't working. Go to the, south side of Chicago. You tell me how well that's worked over the years.
Yeah, no, it's not a great place to be. Yeah, no, for sure. Those are good points. And I again lost my train of thought. Alexandra, do you have anything? No, just no. Okay. Yeah, like you mentioned privatized prisons before, Mark. That's another just scam. Like you said, because they need, the more prisoners they get, the more money they get, the more profits they make, and so it's just this feedback loop, this recursive cycle of just money. And there's something audacious about treating a human being, even a criminal. I mean, I'm not sure about like psychopathic serial killers, something like that. Maybe there are a few exceptions, but you shouldn't treat people like that. I mean, that's why they're in jail in the first place, because they did something that you're not supposed to do that. Okay, so just because they're a person, you don't do that to them.
Yeah, we don't see them as people, though. I think. I mean, we kind of make it like the whole prison system's kind of a shoot, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen it like over the years, like traffic cop stops. When I was growing up, we would get warnings. Those don't exist anymore.
No, I've noticed that too. Like, yeah, you're right.
The man, they go directly. Don't
do that again, young man. Okay, sir.
Yeah, they go directly to give me money.
Yep.
And then having navigated what that traffic cop scenario, for a long time, you hire a lawyer, if you get, in worse trouble, and you can always get through it magically, you can get a whole bunch of, tickets that, I would say that maybe some people would say you shouldn't drive for a while, but you pay the right people and go through court system, you're driving the next day. Yep. Right. Cause I mean, it's just like, we think it's doing something, but it's doing something a little different.
It definitely privileges wealthy people. There's no doubt,
Yeah.
right?
Well, but then the negative exists too, because if you have no money, then you can't even play in the game. You're forced to be the criminal because you can't. You know what I mean? You have to have a car and insurance and shit to get to a job somewhere and barely make enough to pay for your gas and whatever place to live because minimum wage ain't doing it. So, but it's chicken and the egg. You can't have a job unless you have enough to have a place to live and
Right.
a way to
Right,
get
but
to
you need
work
the
and a way
job to
to
have all this stuff. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, right? It's just like that ledge. You're like, okay, I have no money, or I need, I don't know, magically, I don't know, just throw a word out there, 25,000 a year just to barely get a buy on something. I don't know.
Yeah. No, for sure.
It's a big jump.
It is a big jump. I agree. It's tough. That's really tough.
So maybe we should talk about we used to call this stuff, or I've heard it, guaranteed income or whatever.
IB. What is it called, Alexandria?
Universal
UBI,
basic income.
Universal Basic Income.
Yeah,
Where like everybody gets like $1,000 a month, just period.
Right. I mean, I think if anything's going to be fixed, it's more like addressing the obvious miscalculation of how our government currently serves its people.
Yeah,
I mean, it's right. I mean, anything else is just we're playing shenanigans with. I don't know.
They did.
Still,
I think it was Yale. I think it was either Yale or Princeton. One of those big ones did a study of some years ago about like a statistical analysis of like popularity of an issue or a law or a bill amongst the general public and Congress's voting on it. And they turned out, mathematically speaking, that like if an issue has even 100% support amongst the public, or if it has 0% support amongst the public, Congress will always vote about 30% to represent 30% of the public, and not 100% or 0%. So it's totally skewed. So as far as like any sort of like the will of the people, a direct democracy or anything like that, that doesn't exist either, because Congress has a different agenda than the people that they say they represent. Probably a lot having to do with lobbyists and money and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I thought it was an interesting study for sure.
I think it should be like one of those things where our local representative is like required to meet with the constituents,
like
required to have town or something, something, because it seems to me they stay whatever in Washington. They don't come to where they're just partying all the time, having a good time, playing the same little fucking game of ping pong or whatever you want to metaphor. But it's the same thing because it's the same pendulum we've been going through since we've been kids. They just blue becomes a little less blue or red becomes a little red. It's the same bullshit. It's nothing.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah.
No, there ain't no shiny city on the hill yet there, Ronnie.
Right. No, sorry, Mr. Reagan. You were mistaken.
So, no 1,000 points of light, Mr. Bush.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, it's tough. And like, Alexandra, you mentioned like environmental justice. That's a good one too. Like, there is this like kind of basic truth that like nobody owns the planet. You don't own nature. That's ridiculous. You might own a little segment of it, but you don't get to pollute, because your pollution is going to go up in the air and go over here to this community or this country or whatever else, and you don't get to do that. Okay, that's clearly unjust. If justice has anything to do with fairness, say, I mean, a lot of people, there's a famous book by John Rawls, a political philosopher from 20th century, Justice as Fairness, and I read it and I don't actually believe what he's saying, but it's a very, very intelligently written book. Okay, so yeah, I mean, the notion of equality, like some people say, like, well, no, I'm sorry, people are not equal to one another. It's just like, what are you looking at that you're seeing equality? Like, that's nuts. Like, Alexandra, talk about that.
Oh gosh, equality. I'm sorry.
what equality of rights or equality of character?
Well, definitely equality of rights, but people are like, no, you don't have. Not everybody is allowed. I'm not advocating for this. I think that we're primarily fundamentally equal, by being we're all persons. I think there is a single definition of a human person, which is a rational moral agent with free will and a body, and that applies. Like if you have one or more or less of those things, you're just not a person.
I was thinking like 4 limbs, but then you exclude quadriplegic, so that wasn't going to work. So. Well, anyway, yes, I'm sorry, Alex.
No, they still have a body. It's just not a full
right?
body.
It's a person. Looks like a person.
Yeah, it seems
talks.
like
Or,
that. You know, are you talking? Like that's a measure of intelligence and cognition. Is that, you know,
depends on what they say.
But Alexandria, go ahead and like the whole equality thing.
That goes back to what I was saying earlier about you're right, we're never going to make everybody equal, which is why we should keep trying to do better every single time, because if we were to have nobody be equal, we would be back in the monarchy and we wouldn't exist in this country. I don't know anybody that's going to say I'm a proud American and I also proudly support the monarchy. Some might act like it, but they're not going to come out and say it. You know what I'm saying? So I think there's a certain civil common notion, whether only subconsciously or openly consciously, that there are certain quantities of decision making that should be done collectively, and in particular should not be done to just pointlessly make life harder for others. If you want to believe X, Y, or Z about trans stuff that's bigoted, that's your right to. But the second you start implying that onto others and hindering their life, making the outcomes worse than that, then all of a sudden that becomes part of what we were talking about earlier with social justice issues, where typically it has to start from the bottom, people who see that and then see, oh, this is a wrong, this person's being trained wrongly, we need to make amends, to see some sort of justice for that. And then we get the whole cycle starting from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see like the caste system interfering with this concept a bit. I mean, they name it in India, but I believe that in America, it's literally the same wall that separates continually forever.
It's just not governmentally established. It's like, it's more
Right.
the walls here are more like economic, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, it's certainly that, but it basically sets that barrier of inequality because you can't play in
100%.
games you're not invited to.
Yeah, I mean, like you said with the whole lawyer thing, Mark. I mean, like if you're wealthy in this country, you're going to have an easier time period. End of story.
Yeah, you just hire people.
I mean, with the government, you know, like it's just. I mean, that the data is clear. So you know, on that one.
So there's an inherent tilt, right, to inequality because people who have money can spend that money on more people to get their way.
Yeah, 100%.
To drive inequality. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of like something that's not spoken obviously in our political realm, but to me, it's never been an argument between red and blue. It's always been a hidden argument between rich and poor. It's just pitting those two. It's making one group feel okay about making the other group miserable.
That's well said. No, I mean, Nancy Pelosi's worth like over $200 million. Elizabeth Warren's worth over 20 million. Even Bernie Sanders has 3 houses and he's worth like 2 million.
I know, but they were fun to watch fight for you, right?
I love it. I love Bernie Sanders just as a character. He's like a walking Muppet.
Exactly.
I love him. But and I know his heart's in the right place. I just don't think his strategies are proper. Whatever. Yeah. You know, so yeah, no, but it's at least Republicans aren't afraid to say like, hey, oh, was it Ron Thompson from Wisconsin? The real jerk guy? Is that
Johnson.
his name?
Ron Johnson.
Okay. Johnson. The other day, he's like, well, you know, you just got to realize the facts that, you know, rich people make jobs. He's like, I've never seen a poor person make a job.
Come on. I mean, can I just say it?
So
Ron
at least
Johnson's
he's being
an
honest.
No, he's an idiot. Listen to him.
He's not
enough.
an idiot, but he's
no, but see, you can't.
Like, no, I'm for the working
here's the
people.
problem. You're taking Ron Johnson out of context of Ron Johnson. He's an idiot. Don't quote him because he said one thing that was smart.
No, I don't think it was smart. I just think it was honest. That's what I'm saying, is that he's not trying to save face and be like, oh, I'm all for the working people, even though I'm worth $200 million. You know, that like crap like that. And I'm shutting down picket lines, you know, oh, shut up.
Yeah.
You know, but so Northwoods Press, I don't know who that is, but they say they want to talk. Do you know, does anyone know who that is? Northwoods Press? No. Okay.
Are they knocking at the door?
No, there's a comment section over here.
Oh, fun.
David, 100%. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, okay. Well, it's been a little over half an hour. Did you guys want to call it? I'm good. I got a 12-pack of beer waiting for me.
It was a good discussion.
It was a good discussion. It was very lively and intelligent. Thank you very much.
Well, let's see if any of our doors get knocked down because we think
exactly. ICE is coming for you. That was all pro-immigration.
Because they're collecting information on us right now to, you know, triangulate the bad people and, you know, take away their health care, I guess, or something like that, or Social Security. You're not allowed to have Social Security if you're left-leaning, or I don't know how they're going to do that.
I don't know. Yeah, no, this whole big, beautiful bill thing, like even Elon Musk says, what are you doing? Like, he's like, I just spent the last 4 months trying to save money and you just spent it all.
His butt.
You know?
I can't say so, like,
yeah, and then these tariffs and everything. Oh, it's a nightmare. Now, like I'm watching these videos, like the whole world seems about ready for war.
nobody stopped them. Do you realize that? I mean,
That's
the
because
Democrats were
Republicans
telling
went for it all.
everybody and educating everybody what a tariff was, and nobody stopped them. It's just like there's this huge disconnect where literally if you just had your, and maybe it's because everybody listens to Fox News. I don't know, all the right wingers, but nobody stopped them. And then here it is. And guess what? It's a tax on you. Oh, really? Wow. I'm surprised. Like, why are you surprised? How is that possible?
Yeah, like, and like, did you think that other countries weren't going to retaliate in kind? Like, did you think they were just going to bow to your will? I actually wonder if you did think that. Like, oh, I'm Trump and we're America. They're just going to do whatever we say. No, they're not. I mean, Canada just imposed a big tariff on electricity coming into New York, Minnesota, and Michigan. And now, so Trump is claiming like a national emergency for electricity because they're about to get whacked in those 3 states, because it comes from like, okay, you want to put tariffs on us? We'll put tariffs on you. It's very simple.
Yeah. Right.
So
it's so, I don't know, grade schoolyard level.
it's sophomore.
It's amazing.
I mean,
It's
child.
truly amazing.
Yeah. So
because I mean, they're going to go through this whole process and be like, oh, well, yeah. Okay. So anyway, we're going to leave and everything we did was right. And everything will be a catastrophe. Right.
Yeah. Just, I mean, it's my, I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Go down to Texas and start drawing crayon pictures like the last right-wing president.
He signs executive orders with Crayola instead of the auto pen. He's about there. He's a weirdo. Anyway, all right. Thank you, Alexandria and Mark. Thanks for coming on the show. It was really a really great conversation. Thank you so much. We'll have to do this again. Maybe I'll pick a different topic. But thanks for coming on. And hang on after I ended the stream. I just want to chat for a second.
Goodbye, Lake County.
That's right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Let's Talk Lake County. I'm your host, David Rich. We'll see you soon. All right, on. End stream. There's a little delay, so don't incriminate.